The Edgewater Beach Hotel was built on the shores of Lake Michigan at Edgewater in 1916. It was a magnificent structure, and it grew over the next 20 years. The original investors were John Corbett, John Connery, who lived across the street, Benjamin Marshall, and Charles Fox. The manager of this hotel was a man named William Dewey. He came from working, oddly enough, in the coal industry, and he somehow got connected with Mr. Corbett and Connery and eventually became an investor in the hotel. Mr. Dewey was a genius at running this new complex. You have to remember, this was a new idea to have such a large hotel, almost like a resort. And he was known for being able to keep all the marbles or all the balls in the air and make it a very effective and exciting place to be. The pictures of the hotel, many of the favorite ones, feature the hotel from the lakeshore and show the actual beach. The beach, however, was very small, and you can see in this photo hardly 20 feet of sand next to the big seawall that was protecting the hotel. Other favorite and iconic pictures are the entrance to the hotel. One even appeared in a car ad for an Oldsmobile in the early 20s. The land that had been developed as a golf course and a playground now was going to be given over to the annex. And the annex went through several iterations before it became this huge building with some 300 plus hotel units. We can see from the plans in the exhibit that the annex was going to be a much larger hotel. And they began using what was the equipment available in the early 20s. They had a horse-drawn wagon as well as a small truck. And we have a photo of the excavation of the hotel. We were given a group of photos that were water damaged that showed step by step the building of this annex. The annex then had to be connected to the original hotel, and the annex was south of the original building. And so they built something they called the Palagio, which is a name they made up for the connection between the two buildings. The style of the hotel interior seemed to be reminiscent of Italian or Spanish style. So they had this central fireplace with 4 openings. They had wood beam ceilings, and they had elegant carpeting in the hallways, and they had very elegant rooms for dining and special events. And they had some mysterious rooms, including something called the Black Cat Club, which was not open for the whole length of the hotel's life. But many of the furnishings from the interiors of the rooms was really very ordinary. And those of us who are alive in the 21st century look at them and think, they're kind of shabby, they're kind of plain. That's because of what was available in 1920. There was a busy front entrance with elevators. There were elevator attendants. The interior of the elevator was elegantly designed with wallpaper and maybe something to talk about with a reserved ceiling, etc. This annex building also offered a garage. This is a new thing for a hotel. As you probably know, many hotels downtown that were built in this era really didn't have parking because not that many people had cars. But this hotel in 1921 had the foresight to think, we need parking. And so they built a 200-car garage under the annex building that was available for guests. It later also was used for car shows, which, because of Mr. Dewey's showmanship, was one of the elements that he brought to the hotel activities. Probably the most famous room in the hotel was the Marine Dining Room. And we'll talk a little bit more about the music from that site later. But it was an elegant room, and it had windows or doors that opened out onto the lakefront. So the lake breezes could come into the dining room if it was a perfect night. And if not, it would just be closed off. Among the other things on the interior of the hotel that came with the annex were a series of shops. And these shops offered all kinds of items, souvenirs of the hotel, places to get your hair done, to buy a dress, some men's haberdashery. And they were all pictured in a great poster on the interior in the Ripples magazine. So we have many postcards made of these interior shops. The flower shop. Of course you would want to send your bride a bouquet of flowers, right? The Edgewater Beach Hotel was a popular place for weddings and for honeymoons. So even today we can hear and meet people who say, "Oh, I had my honeymoon at the Edgewater Beach Hotel. It was so beautiful." The traffic added to the congestion around the hotel, but really didn't cause problems for the hotel guests. They were able to enjoy all the activities. There was a tennis court built. The golf course was kind of shrunk in size, but there was a children's activity area, and at one point even a seaplane was landing. Later they built a stage for plays into the hotel, but as you can see in some of the pictures, the sand next to the hotel grew larger and larger, and the lake got farther and farther away. So those changes affected the development of the hotel activities. Among the services in the hotel was things provided by a wonderful staff. If you decided to go out to the lake shore, you could have food brought to your table and drinks, and you could dance at the band shell, and so there was a lot of outdoor activity in the summer. There was also a very devoted kitchen staff. We have a photo of the kitchen staff with a big sign that says "No talking allowed in the kitchen." We have phone operators available to connect phone calls. It's hard to remember phones that were all based on wires, but these people worked all day long. We also had phone booths, and those booths then were available for the hotel's customers to make outgoing calls. Among the special events that were available were wedding venues and the most amazing chefs who created the most outlandish wedding cakes and buffet dinners and plate service to your table for weddings. It was so elegant, it was to dream of. Many people had to work to produce these events. The staff was treated to special anniversaries, and they were treated to a dinner, so they once got to sit down at the hotel instead of working the whole time. And then during World War II, when the Japanese were sent to internment camps, another option was offered, and that was to move to the Midwest and work in hotels. So a large group of Japanese people chose that option and were able to come to Chicago and work. And Mr. Dewey thought that would be nice to have a photograph of all of them, so he had them stand for a photograph and treated them to an event. There were many other big weddings. The chief big wedding was the wedding of the Connery daughter, who had been a student at Immaculata High School and who had found someone to marry. And everybody and their brother was at that wedding. Hundreds of people were there because he was the owner of the hotel and could foot this bill. So how did the Edgewater Beach Hotel affect the Edgewater neighborhood? I can say at first, in 1908, when the purchase was being planned for the land along the shore, there was great consternation because the land along the lakeshore was designated as parkland. And a group of residents joined and signed a petition opposing the sale of the parkland to a private entity. Their names and addresses were printed in the Chicago Tribune. It was to no avail. The Corbett, Connery, and Benjamin Marshall and Fox business won the day and were able to start building in 1914. It took them a couple years to finish the hotel. In the meantime, the residents had to cope with the fact that this hotel complex was going to prevent them from walking to the lake. Now, many people had purchased homes along this lakeshore thinking that the lake would always be there and they would be able to enjoy it. But as it turned out, the hotel decided to put up a fence to prevent the outsiders from coming on their property. So Mr. Everett Stetson gave us this photograph showing the fence, that he and his buddies would stay outside the fence when they went to the lake shore. We have just a few other pictures of people who were active going to the lakefront near the hotel. There was also a polar bear club, and the tennis courts were actually more available to people in the area as well as the hotel residents. And eventually some church activities, card parties, and proms were held at the hotel. That was probably much later in the hotel's history because the interest in the hotel changed with the advent of the airplane, which could travel coast to coast and no longer needed stopovers in Chicago. So here we have a postcard enlargement of the Edgewater Beach in 1949. This was its heyday, and you see many people on the shore, and you see the great expanse of beach. You also see only the two other remaining buildings that are still at the site. One is the Edgewater Beach Apartments, the far end, and that was built in 1928 and 29. And then the Renaissance Apartments, which is at 5510 Sheridan Road. This is a postcard, and so it has been airbrushed to look perfect. There were many, many, many postcards, and many people collect them. It shows and reminds them of the wonderful days of the Edgewater Beach Hotel in Edgewater. The first radio broadcasts from the Edgewater Beach began with these two young men who created a radio station with a radio shack, sounds like a familiar term, at Bryn Mawr and the lakefront. Eugene McDonald and Matthews created the Chicago Radio Laboratory. In 1921, they moved their manufacturing from a street in just south of the hotel up to 6433 Ravenswood. They eventually became Zenith Radio. So we have the little poster here so that you can see Zenith. At the hotel, they had to put in radio equipment. There's a mixing station, a quiet room with drapes, and the broadcast equipment on the roof. This enabled them to send initially just broadcast to those people who had little wireless radios, but eventually to the entire country. The dance music that was being played in the Marine Dining Room was now available to everyone. And you could tune in any evening and there would be some band playing, because the hotel was really a 24-hour, all week long operation. Some of the people who performed at the hotel was this Oriole Orchestra, Paul Whiteman, Tom Fiorino, and Harry Sosnick. They had many other famous people attended these events. Xavier Cugat was there with Abby Lane, and we had singers and dancers. The Dorothy Hill dancers performed in a show in the Marine Dining Room. And there were other odd things that happened at the hotel, circus animals and all kinds of fun and excitement, because really Mr. Dewey was just so good at promoting the hotel and bringing people together to enjoy the fun along the lakefront. We have one little picture here of the actual band shell, and it shows the beach walk is just packed with people. You had to pay a small amount, like $1, to go there, but there were tables and you could have drinks served to you and you could dance. And I looked at the picture and I think, how could anybody dance in that crowded dance floor? It's so crowded. The radio stations went through several iterations. They went from this initial broadcast to the live dance band 1929 to 1954, and then later in 1958 to 1968 they were under auspices of WGN, so it went through several stages. In addition to the performance at the hotel, there were also other popular gathering places, one of them being the Yacht Club. Now, the Yacht Club was meant to make you think you were on a boat. And so there was a waving ramp that brought you into the Yacht Club, and the service was marine themed. They had sailors standing, dummies standing at attention. Some of the activities at the hotel were actually open to the public, and the most important one was the summer playhouse, which started in the 1950s. And this went on for many years, with each summer having a series of famous people come to perform, including Zero Mostel, who is among the most noted. They performed many different plays, and a schedule was provided. And they even at one point had a theater stage in the water off the hotel boardwalk. It seemed to not work out really well, so they only did it for a couple of years and then decided to bring it in. They also built a stage in kind of a protected area near the Marine Dining Room, and that also caused them some trouble because, as many of you know, it's kind of windy by the lake. And so hearing people in that situation became a problem. They didn't have the amplification and microphones that we have today. So we have many of the famous stars, and we have playbills that show what famous performances were held at the hotel. This was kind of an interesting thing that only happened in the 50s after the changeover. There was a design changeover at the hotel as well, so that rooms that we call the Marine Dining Room were viewed as old hat, and they created something called the Polynesian Room, and tried to sort of get on with something that some of the downtown hotels had done. So we see a changeover happening in an attempt to keep the hotel interesting and vital, but in actual fact, it really just didn't work. Eventually, the activities at the hotel took a downturn. First of all, Mr. Dewey resigned in 1948 and then was rehired and worked there till 1952. In this time period, the ownership of the hotel changed. People who used to go there were no longer in attendance, and there was some indication that the mob in Chicago had found a place where nobody was paying attention and they could come in and run parties, etc. At one of these parties, they featured one gangster, and the FBI came in dressed as waiters to serve the assembled group and arrest them when they came to sit down and celebrate that birthday party. Another factor in the changes at the hotel was that Lakeshore Drive was voted into existence by the aldermen of the city of Chicago, and they wanted an extension that went up to Hollywood. That would mean that it would bypass the hotel, taking away the lakefront property that the hotel did not actually own. Back in the beginning, when the initial investors purchased the land, they gave up the riparian rights, so they had no right to the lakeshore. So once they built something in front of them, they were just stuck. They did try by adding a swimming pool to make it still a great hotel to stop and visit, and it was still operating up into 1969 when it went into bankruptcy court. The reason for the bankruptcy was largely because the ownership had been taking all of the profits from the Edgewater Beach Hotel and putting it into their other hotels that were not in Chicago. That forced the hotel to make economies and to close off rooms, and in general to operate a less exciting hotel. So another factor that affected the downturn at the hotel was that the hotel did not itself have air conditioning. Now, back when the Depression hit, the hotel struggled to keep hotel rooms filled, and so they took a section of the hotel and made it into apartments. So there were people living at this hotel for years. They loved the hotel and were shocked when it went into bankruptcy court. The air conditioning problem was not really for the hotel rooms, but for the larger areas of the hotel, the dining rooms, the passaggio, various other places could not be air conditioned without a great deal of investment. And because it was looking like the hotel was not at the top of its game anymore, no one really wanted to invest in that enterprise. Also, because of the mob and their interest in the hotel, Mayor Daley was done with it, and he was the mayor, so if he did not want the hotel to continue on that site, he was more interested in seeing the developers move in and create something else on the Edgewater Lakeshore. In all of this, the Edgewater residents had no say. They couldn't lobby, they didn't even do petitions. However, when they started to demolish the hotel, they did stand up and say that they'd like the swimming pool to remain open. And so from 1968 to 1970, the swimming pool was still open, and residents could still rent a cabana there and go there to swim. Once the developers took over the site, they provided no access to the park through their site, and basically no access, no swimming pool or any other activities for the public. They did offer things through the private residents, but not for the public. So the hotel took almost a year to demolish because of the concrete structure. It had been so well built. It could have been a bomb shelter as far as protecting the public from adverse attack. However, we weren't really looking for adverse attack, but many people went and took photographs. We only have one in the exhibit because we don't like to remember the hotel as it's being demolished. We much prefer to remember it as the beautiful place that it was. So the Edgewater Beach Hotel was torn down in 1970, and other buildings were put in its place. And this is a diagram for those who know the area and who can think, what buildings are there now? This shows exactly where they were. So the building called the Park Tower is on the site of the original hotel. The building called the Breakers is on the site of the annex. And then in between there and the Edgewater Beach Apartments are two smaller condo units. This diagram was done for us by Tom Green, who looked at the maps and the photos and tried to fit in where the buildings actually are.